The American Revolution, a monumental conflict that gave birth to a new nation, was rooted in the complex and often contentious relationship between the British Empire and its American colonies. By the mid-18th century, the British government, burdened by debts from the 7 Years' War, sought to increase revenue by imposing a series of taxes and regulations on the colonies. The Sugar Act of 1764 and the Stamp Act of 1765 were among the first of these measures, provoking widespread protest. The Stamp Act, in particular, required that many printed materials in the colonies be produced on stamped paper produced in London, carrying an embossed revenue stamp. This affected legal documents, magazines, playing cards, newspapers, and many other types of paper used throughout the colonies. The colonists, who had no representation in the British Parliament, saw this as an egregious violation of their rights. The slogan, "No taxation without representation," became a powerful rallying cry, symbolising the growing discontent. Resistance to these acts took many forms, from organised protests and petitions to violent confrontations with tax collectors, culminating in the formation of the Stamp Act Congress in 1765, where delegates from 9 colonies convened to articulate their opposition. The repeal of the Stamp Act in 1766 temporarily eased tensions, but the British government's attempt to assert its authority through the Declaratory Act, which stated that Parliament had the right to make laws for the colonies in all cases whatsoever, only deepened the sense of injustice among the colonists. The situation worsened with the passage of the Townshend Acts in 1767, which imposed duties on essential goods like glass, paper, paint, and tea. The revenue generated was used to pay the salaries of British officials in the colonies, further eroding the autonomy of colonial governments. The colonists responded with a new wave of protests, including boycotts of British goods and the widespread harassment of British officials. The Sons of Liberty, a secret organisation founded to protect the rights of the colonists, played a crucial role in organising these resistance efforts. The tension between the British soldiers stationed in the colonies and the colonists themselves eventually led to the Boston Massacre in 1770, where British troops fired into a crowd, killing 5 men. This event was widely publicised and used by colonial leaders like Samuel Adams and Paul Revere as evidence of British tyranny, further galvanising the revolutionary movement. The British attempt to reassert control through the Tea Act of 1773, which granted the struggling British East India Company a monopoly on tea sales in the American colonies, led to one of the most iconic acts of defiance in American history, the Boston Tea Party. On December 16, 1773, a group of colonists, dressed as Mohawk Indians to disguise their identities, boarded British ships in Boston Harbour and dumped 342 chests of tea into the water, protesting the Tea Act and the concept of taxation without representation. In response, the British Parliament enacted the Coercive Acts in 1774, known in the colonies as the Intolerable Acts. These laws were intended to punish Massachusetts and dissuade further resistance. They included measures such as the closing of Boston Harbour until the tea was paid for, the revocation of Massachusetts' charter, and the imposition of martial law. Rather than subduing the colonies, these acts only strengthened their resolve, leading to the convening of the First Continental Congress in September 1774. Delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies met in Philadelphia to coordinate a response, ultimately agreeing to a boycott of British goods and setting the stage for armed conflict. The first shots of the American Revolution were fired on April 19, 1775, at the battles of Lexington and Concord. British General Thomas Gage, the military governor of Massachusetts, had received orders to seize colonial military supplies stored in Concord. However, colonial intelligence networks, including figures like Paul Revere and William Dawes, quickly spread the word of the British advance. In the early hours of April 19th, local militias, known as Minutemen for their ability to be ready at a moment's notice, gathered to resist the British. The first confrontation occurred in Lexington, where a small group of Minutemen faced off against a much larger British force. The exact circumstances of who fired the first shot remain unclear, but it marked the beginning of open hostilities. The British forces, after dispersing the Minutemen in Lexington, continued to Concord, where they encountered a much larger and more organised colonial force. The subsequent skirmishes forced the British into a hasty retreat back to Boston, with colonial forces harassing them along the way. The shot heard round the world not only initiated the Revolutionary War, but also symbolised the colonists' determination to fight for their rights and independence. With the outbreak of war, the Second Continental Congress convened in May 1775, with delegates from all 13 colonies gathering in Philadelphia to coordinate the colonial war effort. One of their first actions was to appoint George Washington, a respected Virginian known for his leadership during the French and Indian War, as the commander-in-chief of the newly formed Continental Army. Washington faced the formidable challenge of organising and leading a loosely coordinated group of colonial militias against one of the most powerful military forces in the world. The early months of the war saw a series of battles and skirmishes, including the Battle of Bunker Hill in June 1775. Although the British ultimately won this battle, it came at a significant cost, with heavy casualties that demonstrated the colonists' resolve and ability to stand up to British regulars. Meanwhile, the Continental Congress worked to solidify its position, issuing the Olive Branch Petition in a final attempt to avoid a full-scale war. However, King George III rejected the petition, declaring the colonies in open rebellion and paving the way for a broader conflict. The move toward independence accelerated in 1776 as the realities of war and the influence of revolutionary ideas took hold across the colonies. Thomas Paine's pamphlet, Common Sense, published in January 1776, played a pivotal role in shifting public opinion. Paine argued for complete independence from Britain, using clear and persuasive language to make the case that it was both natural and necessary for the colonies to break free from British rule. His arguments resonated with a wide audience, galvanising support for the revolutionary cause. By the summer of 1776, the momentum for independence was unstoppable. On July 2nd, the Continental Congress voted in favour of independence, and 2 days later, on July 4th, they formally adopted the Declaration of Independence. Drafted primarily by Thomas Jefferson, the Declaration was a bold assertion of the colony's right to self-governance. It listed the grievances against King George III and articulated the Enlightenment ideals of individual liberty, government by consent, and the right to revolt against tyranny. The Declaration of Independence not only marked the birth of a new nation, but also set forth principles that would inspire future generations worldwide. The Revolutionary War was as much a battle for hearts and minds as it was a physical conflict. Leaders like Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson played critical roles in securing international support for the American cause. Franklin, in particular, was instrumental in negotiating the crucial alliance with France. After the American victory at the Battle of Saratoga in 1777, Franklin convinced the French government to recognize American independence and provide military assistance. This alliance was a turning point in the war, as French troops and naval forces played a vital role in the eventual American victory. Meanwhile, the Continental Army faced numerous challenges, including shortages of supplies, harsh winters, and difficulties in maintaining morale. The winter of 1777 to 1778 at Valley Forge was particularly brutal, with soldiers enduring freezing temperatures, inadequate shelter, and a lack of food. However, the arrival of Baron von Steuben, a Prussian military officer, brought much-needed training and discipline to the Continental Army. Von Steuben's efforts helped transform the ragtag group of soldiers into a more professional and effective fighting force, capable of taking on the British Army in open battle. The military campaign of the Revolutionary War was marked by a series of significant battles and strategic manoeuvres. In the early years of the war, the British focused on capturing key cities and ports along the eastern seaboard, including New York City, which fell to British forces in 1776. General Washington, recognizing the superior strength of the British Army, adopted a strategy of attrition, avoiding large-scale confrontations while conducting hit-and-run attacks. This approach was exemplified in the daring Christmas night crossing of the Delaware River in 1776, when Washington led a surprise attack on Hessian mercenaries stationed in Trenton, New Jersey. The victory at Trenton, followed by another success at Princeton, boosted American morale and reinvigorated the revolutionary cause. These early victories demonstrated Washington's tactical brilliance and ability to inspire his troops, even in the most challenging circumstances. However, the war would continue to drag on, with both sides experiencing victories and setbacks, as the British struggled to maintain control over the vast and often hostile territory of the American colonies. In 1777, the British launched a campaign to seize control of the Hudson River Valley, aiming to isolate New England from the other colonies. The plan involved a three-pronged attack, with British forces advancing from Canada, New York City, and the western frontier. However, the campaign was plagued by logistical challenges and poor coordination among the British commanders. The turning point came at the Battle of Saratoga, where American forces under the command of General Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold decisively defeated the British Army, led by General John Burgoyne. The victory at Saratoga was a significant boost to American morale and had far-reaching consequences on the international stage. It convinced the French government that the American cause was worth supporting, leading to a formal alliance between France and the United States in 1778. French military and financial aid, along with the involvement of other European powers like Spain and the Netherlands, turned the tide of the war in favour of the Americans. The British, now facing a global conflict, found it increasingly difficult to sustain their war effort in North America. As the war dragged on, the British shifted their focus to the southern colonies, believing that they could rally loyalist support and gradually regain control of the region. The Southern Campaign saw brutal and destructive fighting, with major battles taking place at Camden, Cowpens, and Guilford Courthouse. Although the British achieved some initial successes, the resilience of American forces and the use of guerrilla tactics by commanders like Nathaniel Greene and Francis Marion, known as the Swamp Fox, gradually wore down the British forces. The strategy of attrition proved effective, as the British found themselves overextended and unable to maintain control of the vast southern territory. By 1781, General Charles Cornwallis, the British commander in the south, decided to move his forces to Yorktown, Virginia, where he hoped to receive reinforcements from the British Navy. The siege of Yorktown in 1781 marked the climax of the Revolutionary War. General Cornwallis, having established a defensive position in Yorktown, awaited the arrival of British reinforcements. Unbeknownst to him, the French fleet under Admiral de Grasse had sailed north from the Caribbean and was preparing to blockade the Chesapeake Bay. In a coordinated effort, General Washington and French General Rochambeau led a combined Franco-American force of over 17,000 troops from New York to Virginia, conducting a rapid and secretive march that took the British by surprise. The French fleet's victory over the British Navy at the Battle of the Chesapeake ensured that Cornwallis would receive no reinforcements or escape route by sea. As the Franco-American forces laid siege to Yorktown, Cornwallis found himself surrounded and outnumbered. After weeks of intense bombardment, with his defences crumbling and supplies running low, Cornwallis was forced to surrender on October 19, 1781. The surrender at Yorktown effectively ended major combat operations in the American Revolution. The Treaty of Paris was signed on September 3, 1783, formally ending the Revolutionary War. The negotiations were complex and involved multiple parties, including the United States, Great Britain, France, and Spain. The American delegation, composed of Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and John Jay, skillfully navigated the diplomatic landscape to secure favourable terms. The treaty recognised the independence of the United States and established its borders from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River, with the northern boundary along the Great Lakes and the southern boundary at the 31st parallel, which was the northern boundary of Florida, then controlled by Spain. The treaty also granted Americans fishing rights off the coast of Newfoundland and allowed for the collection of debts owed by Americans to British creditors. The conclusion of the war marked the beginning of a new chapter in American history, as the young nation now faced the daunting task of building a stable and unified government. The American Revolution had profound and far-reaching consequences, both domestically and internationally. The successful struggle for independence inspired revolutionary movements around the world, particularly in France, where the ideals of liberty and equality would soon ignite the French Revolution. In the newly formed United States, the revolution prompted significant social and political changes, challenging traditional hierarchies and sparking debates over issues such as slavery, women's rights, and the role of government. The war had also exposed the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation, the nation's first governing document, which created a loose confederation of states with a weak central government. The inability of the Confederation Congress to levy taxes, regulate commerce, or maintain a standing army led to widespread economic turmoil and interstate conflicts in the post-war period. The most significant of these conflicts was Shays' Rebellion in 1786, an armed uprising of farmers in western Massachusetts protesting economic injustices and the lack of effective government response. The rebellion underscored the need for a stronger central government, setting the stage for the drafting of a new constitution.